Okay, how's it going, everybody? So we're going to read some Lenin today. This is written in 1918. This is, quote, democracy, end quote, and dictatorship. So it's important to understand, like the word authority and autonomy. One of these words have, in the West have like good connotation. One of these words have bad connotation. But are they really different from each other? Democracy and dictatorship. Whoever dictates the government, aren't they the ones? And isn't that determine how democratic something is how many people dictate the government? So, they push this idea of dictatorship means one person deciding everything in the country, and that's extremely silly. That's extremely like I don't think anybody, like even in king days, like there was never a whole kingdom of people who, like the king just convinced everybody to do this and that. Like, like he needed a kingdom there, and that was the dictatorship over the whole kingdom was his kingdom, because they could turn on the king. Well, this is the same thing with, democracy and dictatorship. The U.S. loves to say that it is a democracy. They love to say that other countries are not democracies; they are dictatorships. And the idea of dictatorship, though, is basically what makes the government. When you tell the government to do something, who is the one that has that most say over the government? And here's the truth: what continues our society is production. We don't have anything without physical production getting done, without people carrying out that production, right? So the dictatorship over the government is whoever that government gives ownership over that production to. That is the real dictatorship. So that's technically democracy. I mean, if it's going to be more than one person, there's some sort of democracy there. Somebody's represented in that democracy. So if you only have people who own the production because the government's like, yeah, we want to give you the production, and it's not the people who all carry out the production themselves, that's what we call a bourgeois democracy rather than a proletariat democracy. And therefore, because it's a bourgeois democracy, it is a bourgeois dictatorship, a dictatorship of the bourgeois. Whereas, a proletariat democracy, where the people who physically carry out the production, that those people, if they are given ownership over production, like legal ownership over production, then that's called a proletariat or a workers' democracy, or a dictatorship of the proletariat, a dictatorship of the workers. In the West, they always have to use this word dictator, like as if it's just one person telling this whole country of people what to do. Like, and it's the silliest thing in the world, because that's physically impossible. But they always make that out about, post-colonial countries for some reason, that the countries where they're the ones who are just so docile and so gullible and so they don't understand their own material conditions so poorly that they let one person tell them all what to do. And it's like, no, they all are given ownership over the means of their production. Therefore, that's what we call worker democracy or worker dictatorship. Not, what we have here is government democracy. Is the government, the ownership is only enforced by the government and not even the people who are carrying out the production themselves. So it's just the government participating in its own democracy. It's the government, it's the people who are only use the government to own everyone's production, given full dictatorship over the government. It's kind of funny, but they don't physically have that dictatorship, and that's what they're not ready for. But anyway, let's get into this. This is democracy and dictatorship. A few numbers of the Berlin Red Banner and the Vienna called Weckruf organ of the Communist Party of German Austria that have reached Moscow showed that the traitors to socialism, those who supported the war of the predatory imperialists, and the Scheidemans and Kautskys, Austerlitzes and Rainers, all who were far-right German social democrats, are getting the rebuff they deserve from these genuine representatives of the revolutionary workers of Germany and Austria. We extend warm greetings to both papers, which epitomize the vitality and growth of the Third International. Apparently, the chief question of the revolution, both in Germany and Austria now, is Constituent Assembly or Soviet government. The spokesmen of the bankrupt Second International, all the way from the Scheidemann to Kautsky, stand for the first and describe their stand as defense of democracy. Kautsky has even gone as far as to call it pure democracy, as distinct from dictatorship. In the pamphlet The Proletarian Revolution and Renegade Kautsky, which has just come off the press in Moscow and Petrograd, I examined Kautsky's views in detail. I shall try briefly to give the substance of the point at issue, which has become the question of the day for all the advanced capitalist countries. The Scheidemans and Kautsky's speak about, quote, pure democracy, end quote, democracy, end quote, in general for the purpose of deceiving the people and concealing from them the bourgeois character of present-day democracy. Let the bourgeoisie continue to keep the entire apparatus of state power in their hands. Let a handful of exploiters continue to use the former bourgeois state machine. Elections held in such circumstances are lauded by the bourgeoisie for very good reasons, as being free, equal, democratic, and universal. These words are designed to conceal the truth, to conceal the fact that the means of production and political power remain in the hands of the exploiters, and that therefore real freedom and real equality for the exploited, that is, for the vast majority of the population, are out of the question. It is profitable and indispensable for the bourgeoisie to conceal from the people the bourgeois character of modern democracy. To picture it as democracy in general, or, quote, pure democracy, the Scheidemans and Kautsky's, repeating this in practice, abandoned the standpoint of the proletariat and sided with the bourgeoisie. Marx and Engels, in their last joint preface to the Communist Manifesto in 1872, considered it necessary to specifically warn the workers that the proletariat cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made, that is, the bourgeois state machine, and wield it for their own purpose, but that they must smash it, break it up. The renegade Kautsky, who has written a special pamphlet entitled Dictatorship of the Proletariat, concealed from the workers this most important Marxist truth, utterly distorted Marxism, and quite obviously the praise which Scheidemann and company showered on the pamphlet was fully merited as praise by agents of the bourgeoisie for one switching to the side of the bourgeoisie. It is sheer mockery of the working and exploited people to speak of pure democracy, of democracy in general, of equality, freedom, and universal rights when the workers and all the working people are ill-fed, ill-clad, ruined, and worn out. Not only as a result of capitalist wage slavery, but as a consequence of 4 years of predatory war, while the capitalists and profiteers remain in possession of the, quote, property usurped by them and the ready-made apparatus of state power. This is tantamount to trampling on the basic truths of Marxism, which has taught the workers you must take advantage of bourgeois democracy, which compared with feudalism, represents a great historical advance, but not for 1 minute must you forget the bourgeois character of this democracy, its historical conditional and limited character. Never share the superstitious belief in the state, and never forget that the state, even in the most democratic republic, and not only in a monarchy, is simply a machine for the suppression of one class by another. The bourgeoisie are compelled to be hypocritical, and to describe as popular government, democracy in general, or pure democracy, the bourgeois democratic republic, which is, in practice, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, the dictatorship of the exploiters over the working people. The Scheidemans and Kautsky's, the Austerlitzes and Renners, and now to regret with the help of Friedrich Adler, fall in line with this falsehood and hypocrisy. But Marxists, communists expose this hypocrisy and tell the workers and the working people in general this frank and straightforward truth. The democratic republic, the constituent assembly, general elections, etc., are in practice the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. And for the emancipation of labor from the yoke of capital, there is no other way but to replace this dictatorship with the dictatorship of the proletariat. The dictatorship of the proletariat alone can emancipate humanity from the oppression of capital, from the lies, falsehood, and hypocrisy of bourgeois democracy, democracy for the rich, and establish democracy for the poor, that is, make the blessings of democracy really accessible to the workers and poor peasants. Whereas now, even the most democratic bourgeois republic, the blessings of democracy are in fact inaccessible to the vast majority of working people. Take, for example, freedom of assembly and freedom of the press. The Scheidemans and Kautsky's and Austerlitzes and Renners assure the workers that the present elections to the Constituent Assembly in Germany and Austria are democratic. That is a lie. In practice, the capitalists and exploiters, the landowners, the profiteers own 9/10 of the best meeting halls and 9/10 of the stocks of newsprint, printing presses, etc. The urban workers and the farmhands and day laborers are, in practice, debarred from democracy by the sacred right of property, guarded by the Kautsky's, Renners, and now, to our regret, by Friedrich Adler as well. Sacred right of property is in quotations. And by the bourgeois state apparatus, that is, bourgeois officials, bourgeois judges, and so on. The present freedom of assembly in the press in the democratic, bourgeois democratic German Republic is false and hypocritical, because in fact it is freedom for the rich to buy and bribe the press, freedom for the rich to befuddle the people with venomous lies of the bourgeois press, Freedom for the rich to keep as their property, the landowners' mansions, the best buildings, etc. The dictatorship of the proletariat will take from the capitalists and hand over to the working people the landowners' mansions, the best buildings, printing presses, and the stocks of newsprint. But this means replacing universal, quote, pure democracy, end quote, by the, quote, dictatorship of one class, screamed the Scheidemans and Kauskis, the Austerlitzes and Renners, together with their followers in other countries, the Gomperses, Hendersons, Ronaldos, Van der Velde and company. Wrong, we reply. This means replacing what in fact is the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, a dictatorship hypocritically cloaked in the forms of the democratic bourgeois republic by the dictatorship of the proletariat. This means replacing democracy for the rich by democracy for the poor. This means replacing freedom of assembly in the press for the minority, for the exploiters, by freedom of assembly in the press for the majority of the population, for the working people. This means a gigantic world historic extension of democracy, its transformation from falsehood into truth, the liberation of humanity from the shackles of capital, which distorts and truncates any, even the most, quote, democratic and republican bourgeois democracy. This means replacing the bourgeois state with the proletarian state, a replacement that is the sole way the state can eventually wither away altogether. But why not reach this goal without the dictatorship of one class? Why not switch directly to, quote, pure democracy? So ask the hypocritical friends of the bourgeoisie, for the naive petty bourgeois and Philistines gold by them. And we reply, because in any capitalist society, the powerful tell lies to either the bourgeoisie or the proletariat, while the small proprietors inevitably remain wavering, helpless, stupid dreamers of, quote, pure, end quote, i.e. non-class or above class, democracy. Because from a society in which one class opposes another, there is no way out other than through the dictatorship of the oppressed class. Because the proletariat alone is capable of defeating the bourgeoisie, of overthrowing them, being the sole class which capitalism has united and schooled, and which is capable of drawing its side to the wavering mass of the working population with a petty bourgeois way of life, of drawing them to its side or at least neutralizing them. Because only mealy-mouthed petty bourgeois and Philistines can dream, deceiving thereby both themselves and the workers, of overthrowing capitalist oppression without a long and difficult process of suppressing the resistance of the exploiters. In Germany and Austria, this resistance is not yet very pronounced because expropriation of their expropriators have not yet begun. But once expropriation begins, the resistance will be fierce and desperate, and concealing this from themselves and from the workers, the Scheidemans and Kauskis, the Austerlitzes and Renners betray the interests of the proletariat, switching all the most decisive moment from the class struggle and overthrow of the yoke of the bourgeoisie to getting the proletariat to come to terms with the bourgeoisie achieving social peace or reconciliation of exploited and exploiters. Revolutions are the locomotives of history, said Marx. Revolutions teem quickly. The urban workers and farmhands in Germany and Austria will quickly discern the betrayal of the cause of socialism by the Scheidemans and Kauskis, the Austerlitzes and Renners. The proletariat will cast aside these social traitors, socialists in a word and betrayers of socialism in practice, as it did in Russia with the same kind of petty bourgeois and Philistines, the Mensheviks and the social revolutionaries. The more complete the domination of above-minded leaders, the quicker the proletariat will see that only the replacement of the bourgeois state, be it the most democratic bourgeois republic by a state of the type of the Paris Commune, about which so much was said by Marx, who has been distorted and betrayed by the Scheidemans and Kauskis, or by a state of the Soviet type, can open the way to socialism. The dictatorship of the proletariat will deliver humanity from capitalist oppression and war. Okay, so that's Moscow, December 23rd, 1918. It's a note. It says, the last joint preface to the Communist Manifesto written by Marx and Engels was the Russian edition of 1882. Okay, yeah, so there you have it. That's an explanation of democracy and dictatorship and how these words are the same thing in reality. And if you live in silly la-la land like our media does and our politicians do in the United States and the liberal people who are comfortable with the imperialist state here being the most incarcerating government in human history, operating concentration camps on the borders, and constantly having wars go on with their little capitalist commune with NATO. It's they go, oh, dictatorship is just bad in that an entire country of people can be dictated by one person, and entire army will be dictated by one person. And it's like, no, no, no. It's at the end of the day, it's the people who own the production, and the people in these countries have realized that. And that's what we mean by dictatorship of the proletariat. It's not dictatorships bad and democracies good. It's that they are the same thing, and you can't have one without the other. It is not that authority is bad and autonomy is good. It is that they are the exact same thing, and you cannot have one without the other. Okay, well, thank y'all for tuning in. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, Medium. All of these are Marxist. Hit me up there. Y'all have a great day, and Dodata Goy.